random assignment study. And if you say no, it's post hoc interrupted time series, you're out. You're out of the room. And that's a huge problem for policy, that we have this standard we use, which predisposes policymakers to focus on individual level interventions rather than community level change, because it's harder to get the statistical power you need to persuade people.
Hey, thanks for listening to UC3P, the main page. We know you're enjoying this episode, and we really want to get you back to it as soon as possible. The problem is, if you're listening to this, there's a really good chance you haven't subscribed to the show yet. Don't worry, that's super easy to fix. Just go on your phone, pick your favorite podcast app, and type in UC3P or the main page. It's easy to subscribe, and we know you don't want to miss any more episodes. Again, type in UC3P or the main page and subscribe. Now go tell a friend.
So building on that question, then, what role does state, local, and even national government play in helping implement policies like this?
I think if you have to build relationships over time. So me just using the word naive assumes that you don't have a relationship with the person. That, let's say that there's a chief of staff from the chair of the appropriations committee in your state. That person, that chief of staff, needs to be educated enough and smart enough and interested enough to listen, to read, to start to develop an understanding of this. It helps if they have a good MPP from a good school, because they're maybe more prepared to talk like that. But then they have to persuade the elected official that the research is persuasive enough to establish a high probability of costs or benefits that outweigh the costs. And that comes from building relationships with people. So your podcast is part of that. Briefings on the Hill. People have regular briefings. I did one once, or went to one, and it was mostly staff people. And the elected officials tend not to go to those. But I think that's fine. If you can continually refresh your relationships with the senior staff and help them understand the situation, they will persuade the electeds to do the right thing. But you cannot just focus on elected officials, because they turn over so quickly and their interests are sometimes completely detached from public interests, public safety, good policy. So you have to focus on the staff. And I think the way to do that is not obvious or not easy. It takes sustained effort. I once worked on a foundation project called Key Decision Makers, where this foundation spent a lot of money flying people around the country to go to conferences, and they focused on elected officials. And you could just see the effect drain away after a few years as all those people went on to other things or got defeated in the next cycle. It's frustrating, but that's democracy. And I think we just have to have a sustained investment in developing relationships with staff and educating them on the issues.
What would you say is the role for state and national government grants in programs like this?
I wish it were evidence driven. It's not. I've been doing this a long time. So you went through my CV there, and I can tell you my first job in the field of crime and justice was in 1980, which tells you that I'm getting up there. But having done almost 4 decades now in this field, it's always a fight. It's always a battle. There's always a new crop of enthusiastic, true believers in the latest fad. And you'll have things like mentoring, for example, in the youth justice area. Mentoring is a good idea. It's connecting a young person who doesn't have a good pro-social adult in their lives with such a person and helping them. I mean, we all survived because someone in our lives, when we were 14 years old, someone cared about us and someone helped steer us in a direction that we pursued. And every young person needs that. And so mentoring at its root is a good idea. But the federal government poured so much money into mentoring from the 90s even into the Obama administration that it was far out of proportion to a useful investment portfolio. If we had a truly evidence-driven policy structure, we would balance our investments. So it's kind of like some money you put into safe bonds, others you do speculative market investments. We would do the same thing with research. That mentoring, fine. It's a good model. It's a proven model within some limitations. You make some investments in that. But everyone during those years was rushing around to get in on the mentoring bandwagon, and they spent so much money on it, it just became ridiculous. And then you have grantees out in the field, either practitioners, programs, or researchers, who are primarily interested in getting the grant. And so if they get a sense that the federal government only cares about mentoring, well, guess what kind of proposals you're going to get? And it just becomes this predictive, repeating cycle. So I wish I could be more confident that the role of public officials at the state and federal level is a positive thing and they help create new evidence. But usually we're fighting with them to have them see the need for a diversity of investments. And that means someone has to ride in on their horse and convince the masses that they need to look at this new idea, this new program. And then they need research partners who are good enough to back them up and do research on the model as it's being developed. If it's an emerging program, you need a different kind of personality. You need a researcher who is almost like, anti-authoritarian or questioning of authority, who's willing to challenge conventional wisdom and invest their time and their career in a new idea. And most academics are not like that. Most academics want to get in the best journals, pump out a series of articles, get promoted. And that means investing their time in something safe with a high probability of return on that investment. So it's a tricky business to develop new ideas in a way that can produce public safety more in a cost-effective way using the most innovative ideas. It's not simple.
For my last question, I want to take a step back and look at something a bit broader. How do solutions like cure violence work within the national conversation that we're having about gun violence here in the United States?
I think in that way, I'm a little more optimistic that the conversation is changing somewhat. I think we still have the problem of the public's attention and the politics focusing on mass shootings. And of course, we need to pay attention to mass shootings, often defined as a shooting involving 3 or more victims. But when you look across the number of people, even the number of people killed through homicide, mass shootings is somewhere in the low double digits in terms of the prevalence. When you look at people killed by guns, mass shootings are in these low single digits because most people killed by guns are either suicides or homicides, domestic violence situations, or what we think of as typically street crime. I think cure violence and its presence in the national discussion is starting to make people realize that we will never be able to predict where shootings happen. And all the political interest behind background checks and all that stuff, it's helpful and it's necessary, but you can't predict everybody's behavior. You don't know who the person is just with hatred and anger brewing that is going to grab a gun the next time. So you need something that's broader. And the public health analogy that people make most often is smoking. I bet neither of you guys in that studio are about to fire up a cigarette sitting in that building. We just don't do that anymore. You don't think about smoking, certainly in a public building, or a campus, public transit. We just don't do it anymore because we've changed the norms. And part of the norm change did involve local ordinances that would fine you for smoking when you're not supposed to. But that's not why people continue to refrain from smoking. We changed the expectation that smoking is something you do outside, and then we established a norm that smoking is not good for you, it's not cool. And that took 60 years, basically, to change the way the public thinks about cigarette smoking. But you do that through social norms, education, and changing the context in which behavior is acceptable. And that's public health. And so if we can do that with guns and gun violence, I think more and more people, even if you talk to your average person who has a teenager at home, they recognize that it's not just about setting rules and delivering consequences. They do want sensible things that help discourage behavior. And that's public health. And so Cure Violence is trying to articulate that as an approach to gun violence. And I do hear more, it's gaining more resonance among state, local, even federal officials. But it's not something that changes overnight, just like cigarettes. It takes a couple decades, but I think we're on the path.
All right. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
You're very welcome.
And that's a wrap on another episode of UC3P. Credits go to Arjun Motta for producing and engineering, and Sidhant Wadhera for interviewing and editing. Our assistant production managers are Arjun Motta, Olu Ogidan, Samia Karun, and Sidhant Wadhera. Our finance director is Donovan Harvey. Our publisher is Yaning Wong. Communications assistance came from Jordan Mahome. Our intro music is Knockout 2 by The Tubi, and our outro music is Yes Yes Y'all by Matt Large. This episode featured the track From Sunrise to Sunset by Matt Large. Our cover art was designed by Shirin Raban. If you want to hear more podcasts, check out our website, uc3p.org. And if you want to contact us, our email is theuc3p@gmail.com. Please remember to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And when you do, scroll to the bottom of the feed and give us a 5-star rating. It might be a small act to you, but giving us a 5-star rating really helps us reach more listeners who are just like you. Thank you. My name is David Raban, and stay tuned. We'll be back next week to talk about love in this crazy, crazy time. That's right, we're back on Friday with Naked Love. I started recording in case we could get a blooper. So you have anything funny to say, Olu? Because I think Arjun needs to get out of here. You have 4 seconds to be funny. 3, 2.
What happened when the beaver ran into a wall?
Damn!
We already did this one with Salmia, and then it didn't record.
That sounds right.
Oh, that's ridiculous. I can't believe you just said that.
I love that that's just in your back pocket, apparently, for any time you need to be on cue for something. That's absurd. All right.
That might be the best blooper of all time.
Great.